Welcome to Live from Lockdown Library, presented by Bookworm Goa, with your hosts Nayan and Anandita. This is a series of conversations with book and library people where they share their responses to the ongoing global crisis. We're talking social distancing from a community perspective, we're talking access to books and storytelling, but in quarantine. The hope here is to find ways together to reimagine the library, to think of it as a vital, evolving, transcendent space that can both hold and give voice to this moment of intense uncertainty. Presenting live from Lockdown Library.
Hi, I'm Anandita, a library educator with Bookworm, and today I'm speaking with Usha Mukunda. Usha is a children's librarian. She is a passionate advocate of open libraries and conversations around books with children and young adults. She is also deeply interested in learning about and sharing the nuances of good literature for children. Usha co-founded the Centre for Learning Bangalore and has worked with several rural government and community libraries across India. Good morning, Usha, and thank you so much for joining us on Live from Lockdown Library.
Thank you, Anandita. This is a treat to be able to be in touch with you and to maybe articulate whatever I've been thinking. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you. So, Usha, one significant event that we've been experiencing during this pandemic and lockdown is the online outbreak of stories, texts, read alouds, book activities, author talks, and all sorts of happenings around stories. For those of us who dwell within these, even in normal times, what do you think about this happening in terms of library work?
Okay, so first of all, I should just mention that I'm not a big picture person, but at the same time, I'm not apologetic about it because I do believe strongly that small things are good because they work and then they spread. Okay, so with that caveat, I'll begin. So the short answer to your question is that when this crisis hit, and of course the shock and the gravity of the impact was felt by all of us, but what actually seemed to happen is that libraries and reading became non-essential services. I mean, this essential and non-essential has become such a like buzzwords, right? And I suddenly felt that this was what had happened, and basically everybody and everything went digital. Now, I feel people grabbed at that mode as a lifeline without even thinking twice. I feel that stories are being read out, audiobooks have come into their own, online platforms like Zoom and Team and other aids are being used to keep reading and access to stories ticking. But reading and listening to stories can't just be in a passive mode. At least I feel that quite strongly. So I have questions and doubts, especially because of the speed at which the digital mode has stepped in and filled all the available space for other ideas or thoughts to happen.
So we've also been witnessing many of our library partners, field organizations, and other groups who are engaging with a lot of relief work during this time. Why do you think so, and what do you think about this in light of a vision for libraries?
Um, I think that was a kind of an instinctive way to reach out to help, and in some sense, librarians are those kind of people. They are people who reach out. They are first responders. So somehow I'm quite okay, and I'm one of those who did that too, to the extent that I could. But it doesn't mean that we completely get engulfed by that. I mean, there is the need to reach out from as many people as possible, and librarians out of that kind of spirit of service did reach out. So initially I don't think there's anything wrong, but I feel that we shouldn't lose the thread of what we are essentially supposed to do, and that is we work with children,
Yes.
right? And
Yes, yes.
what I felt was that we work with children from diverse backgrounds. No? Not all of them have access. Coming back to, actually, I'm just continuing on the thread of your first question.
Yes.
Not all the children we work with have access to the online mode, and also even where there is access to the online mode, there are many schools like Center for Learning and maybe others, and parents who feel quite strongly that too much screen time kills creativity and is not desirable, especially for young children. In fact, they are they are making us think as librarians, because they are saying, you always said that too much screen time is not good. How come now you're going online for everything? That was a good question. And on a personal note, I wanted to share something heartening. I have a grandson of 11 who lives in Canada, and there, of course, was that the parents made him, or not made him, but invited him to look at all the books from India that I had taken over the years for him, read them, and kind of, put together a project on India, which consisted of calling us and his cousins to ask questions and so on. These were the uh, real life books like Etoa Munda, yeah, Etoa
Ah,
Munda.
yes.
So what I felt was suddenly, parents who were thinking a bit and not immediately going to the online mode
Hmm.
came up with such interesting ways to make children read books. I mean, this grandchild of mine, I had given up that he would ever read these books because they were there, but they were not clicking. He was not clicking onto them. But suddenly, she made them come alive. The mother, I mean. So,
Hmm.
so these are ways in which one can function through this mode without having to resort to only online. I'm not saying online is not good. Of course, there's plenty
Hmm.
happening, but we also have to keep in mind that a large segment of our user body or our clientele are getting left out in this.
Hmm. Yes. Thank you, Usha. That's the alternatives that you have shared and your experience that you shared um, is reminding us that we need not always just go to online resources directly. There are so many other things that we could engage with as well.
I think Anandita, as you say, all it needs is a pause. Because of the
Hmm.
gravity of the situation, I think we all jumped onto whatever we could find most
Yes.
convenient.
Yes.
But if you pause and explore other possibilities of reaching children, my Bookworm has done it, and even in CFL, my colleague and I brainstormed and came up with a large number of ways in which children can relate to books in their homes at the moment, or relate to stories with their parents and grandparents. So there are multiple ideas that can come out. I don't need to give them because everybody's so creative. They just have to think, differently, or take a pause, and then it will come.
Yes, that pause is so important before jumping into something
Yeah,
directly if it is available immediately.
yeah.
Yeah,
I,
very true.
yeah, no, I think it was natural. I'm not blaming everybody for jumping in because there was a feeling of a crisis. But even in a
Hmm.
crisis, you need to pause, no?
Yes, yes. Yes. So, Usha, this time is a crisis in so many ways,
Mm,
and it's asking us to examine our own vision, whom we want to work with, why, how, and so much more questions.
mm.
Do you agree, and how does this apply to us in the library space?
I think it applies so well. I tell you, envision is a very good word you used when you asked how do you envision this, because it's at a time like this that it's so vital to understand what is vision. Of course, we have been, especially in the library educators uh, course, we have been talking a lot about vision, and to some extent, we may have been talking about far vision, looking ahead. But vision is also in the present, and it's so
Yes.
important to be in the moment of what's happening and bring our vision and our creativity to bear on that. I feel that that is really, really important. This is it. This is, we have talked, about maybe theoretically about vision, but here it is. Here is a chance for you to see what vision is in the present.
In practice, yes.
It's the vision is to do with having the right response in this moment, and vision is not only for good times; it's for all times, right? Good and bad.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it's always a vision that has immense space to gather and disseminate new and appropriate services from the library, and a vision that has resilience. All this is so important at a time like this. This is where we warriors of library work have to step up and show that we have that resilience, right? I mean,
Yes.
remember the book Miss Moore? I think some of you will know about it. It's called Miss Moore Thought Otherwise, and it's the story of an amazing woman librarian in the United States. But she says over there, or in the book, it says that through 2 world wars and through the Great Depression of America, she managed to run that library and keep children safe and happy with reading and interacting. And that was her vision, that it could encompass unknown things, unpredictable things. It's not that you plan a vision for everything that you can control. It's for things which you can't control also, that the vision steps up, right?
Yes, things which suddenly come up and you don't expect.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. I feel that more than ever, librarians really cannot sit back and wait to be asked for help. Yeah, this was what you were saying, okay, and the way forward, right? So I feel that, anyway, some of us never did that, but if at all librarians feel that yes, we have wonderful collections and we just wait and see how children want to use them, no, I think we have to reach out even more now. It will have to reach out to every need, present, future, anticipated, all the things we have talked about in theory. Now is the time to bring that action into action. And
Yes.
some of the things we were discussing with the colleague was, if some children need help to do projects and research online, maybe we need, as libraries, we need to send them a simple guide to go through online, so we are in there all the time. And if some children need reassurance and a sense of comfort, try and search out stories which will give them that comfort. I think all these are things which I felt. As librarians, we always talk about the importance of browsing, right? And it's true that that can only happen in a live library with books. But what if, for each level, we look at books around a range, photograph them, send them to the children on the phone, and then ask them to browse. And then, of course, we have to figure out how to get the books to them. But even that we can think of. There are places which have come up with making packages for the children of whatever books they have asked for. I mean, as slowly as things open up, we can also look at ways and means to reach books. And yeah, if they have a lot of books with them which they haven't returned, wow, I think that's a good thing. They can talk about those books even in the CFL library here, which is our school library. Lots of books naturally got borrowed and are, I won't say they are stuck, I would say they're a treasure now to have.
Yes.
Because we can.
It's some piece of the library which remains with the children.
Exactly. You remember we talked about library, what is that space? So the library now is in many different spaces, in many homes.
Yes. Such a encouraging thought to think of, actually, yeah.
Well, I think that's what I feel quite strongly, that we needn't suddenly close up and become all to do with the digital. Again, I'm not at all saying I'm against it. It's amazing the things that are happening, but please keep the other thing alive as well. It's possible, because then you can reach everybody. It's not just some.
Very true. Yeah. Usha, have you heard of any library activity that has struck you as particularly special or mention worthy at this time that could affirm something for our library praxis?
Yes, I think right there in your bookworm library, you've come up with so many interesting ideas. And I think that was I don't have contact with other libraries. Maybe there are other places which are doing it, but certainly this was wonderful. And even the CFL library, I think they are trying to, one idea I had was that they could call up children and say, look through the books in your own house, talk to your grandparents, maybe, ask them to tell you an anecdote of their early childhood, and then make your own book about it. So it's all part, there are
Mm-hmm.
many things. I think these are all, as I say, each one of us has the ability to inspire others in what we do. I don't think we need to take one model, because in your
Mm.
own in our own spaces we'll find the right things to do. In the village library
Yes.
where I work, luckily this village is has been called a green zone and there are no cases, but I'm not allowed to go there. So I had to ask one of the
Mm.
older children to open the library and enable children to come in one by one, browse and borrow maybe 2 3 books so that they keep them for a while. So in our own spaces, I think we will come up with things. It's all to do with opening your mind.
Mm. Yeah. During this time, which is a very confusing and isolating time, what has given you strength and purpose,
I
Usha?
think things like this that you are doing, these initiatives, really, I mean that, because
Thank you.
when you have an initiative like this, it makes my uh, all my juices work and the brain activity begin, and suddenly you realize that you had so many possibilities in your head which had got just uh, maybe frozen because of the whole fear and anxiety that is going around. And also,
Mm.
I have had colleagues who have sent me interesting articles about some very unusual kind of readings or writings that are happening, about authors' recollections, even about a long view of the coronavirus. So I've been reading things like that, and I've been going back to some comfort books also, I have to admit,
Mm.
both children's books and adults. So that has kept me going. I've not found time hanging on my hands or a feeling of depression. No. I think one
Mm.
thing I have to admit that did happen, but luckily I got out of it. I was feeling low and I didn't know why. And then I realized it's because I'm not having contact with children, which is so much, it is
Mm.
so much in my blood. So then,
Yeah.
fortunately, from CFL school, they included me in one of their sessions. So I could listen to a book talk and I could ask some questions, and then I felt much better.
Mm. Thank you for sharing, Usha. That is so lovely to hear. Uh,
Hmm.
Lastly,
Yeah.
Usha, could you share any thought or message with our listeners?
Hmm. Sure. I mean, you do feel that these are important things for our librarian friends, right?
Yes, extremely,
Hmm.
yes.
I think that somehow I feel that it would be the best thing for us librarians not to feel that this is something different. I think go back to your basics, go back to the core of library work. Okay, you don't have to suddenly
Hmm.
think of something else. Go back to the core, and all your answers are there, all your inspiration is there, because the core of the work is to do with how do you keep the memory of a library fresh and alive. Whether it's the memory of a
Hmm.
library which is being visited daily and you refresh it, or memory of a library which is unfortunately not accessible now, but how can you keep it fresh and alive? And then think,
Yeah.
even though these are different times, go back to your core and then think differently. Act on it. Try out things. If you have a ability to access your children on the phone, talk to them, ask them what they miss most, ask them what they'd like to do, to feel that
Hmm.
library connect again, and then try and see if you can do it. And then look at stories which are emerging from this time, ask them to tell you stories. Maybe as librarians you can start a scrapbook collection of their stories, which will be there when we all gather. What a lovely kind of
Wow.
resource
Yeah.
it'll be if you have a scrapbook with stories, anecdotes, their thoughts on what they see around them, cartoons perhaps, jokes,
Yeah.
and then maybe then you can photograph the scrapbook and send to each child also.
Hmm.
And then yeah, and
Yeah.
then again, a memory of a library, if they have a memory of the books they have, ask them if they can create a treasure hunt from one to the other, like they describe a book and they ask the next child, which book is this? And then that the next
Hmm.
child thinks of a book and describes it and sends it to the next child, so that everybody is in a chain. Or each
Yeah.
one call another and tell a
Connect.
story. You tell a story that you remember and you tell it to each other. So it's it's
Hmm.
it's it's all familiar. It's all the way we function with interaction between children, interaction between the librarian and children. Because yeah, reading out stories and having stories online is, I suppose, great, but what about the discussion and the exploration of the book?
Yes.
That
Interaction.
should not
Yes.
end. That should not end. Then it'll just be a meaningless kind of, okay, story.
Hmm.
I mean, that would be sad. So I think as librarians, really, those of you who have come to the course, think of your essential elements, look at each of the elements and see in what way you can bring that alive in this present situation. And believe me, you can.
Yes. Yes. Very true. Thank you so
Yeah,
much, Usha, for sharing so many ideas and so motivating. Actually, it's quite
thank
joyful to listen
thank
to
you.
you.
Thank you
Uh,
so much. Yeah.
Thank you so
I
much.
think my last
Yes. Thank
message to
you.
them would be the core of the library is untouched. Believe that and build on that.
This has been an episode of Live from Lockdown Library. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you next week.